The stranger in the pharmacy whispered that my husband was a hero to those the world had forgotten. But when I returned home to confront him, he was waiting in the dark with a weapon and a terrifying question. Did someone tell you? Or should I explain why you're never going to leave this house again? The fluorescent lights of the pharmacy always hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, but today the air felt heavy, stagnant with the scent of rubbing alcohol in desperation. I was standing in line, clutching a prescription for my husband, Mark, when an elderly man, someone who looked like he belonged in a faded photograph, tapped my arm. His hands were gnarled, shaking slightly as he clutched a walking cane, but his eyes were sharp, piercingly blue, and unsettlingly familiar. "You're Mark's wife, aren't you?" he whispered. His voice was like dry leaves skittering over pavement. I blinked, taken aback. Mark was a quiet man, a software architect who spent his weekends tinkering in the garage or obsessing over his digital security projects. He didn't have many acquaintances, and certainly none who looked like they'd just stepped out of a Cold War thriller. "I am," I said, offering a tight, polite smile. "Do I know you?" The old man didn't answer my question. Instead, he leaned in closer, his breath smelling of peppermint and something metallic. "I just wanted to say thank you," he rasped, his gaze darting toward the security camera in the corner. "If it wasn't for him, I'd be rotting in a concrete cell right now. He's a hero to those of us the world decided to forget." My stomach dropped. I tried to pull away, but his grip on my forearm was surprisingly firm, a grip that spoke of years of physical discipline. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, my pulse beginning to thrum in my ears. "My husband works in data management." The man let out a soft, wheezing chuckle. "Data management. That's a lovely way to put it. I suppose that's what they called the organized scheme he dismantled back then, right before he vanished into his new life. Tell me, does he still keep that stash of illegal weapons in the false bottom of the cedar chest in the attic? Or did he finally get rid of the evidence after the service's internal review stopped breathing down his neck?" The world tilted. I felt the floor beneath me lose its solidity. My husband, the man who struggled to assemble our IKEA bookshelves, was being described as a shadow operative with a history of handling illegal weapons and narrowly escaping a life-destroying attempt by the authorities to pin a heavy accusation on him. I wanted to laugh, to tell the old man he was delusional, but the way he looked at me with a mixture of reverence and genuine terror stopped the words in my throat. "You should be careful," the stranger continued, his voice dropping to a near-silent hiss. "Men like Mark don't just retire. They get recycled, and if the agency finds out he helped me disappear with those packets of substance before the cleanup crew arrived, they won't just come for him. They'll come for everything he holds dear, including you." He let go of my arm abruptly. Before I could process the adrenaline surging through my veins, he turned and shuffled toward the automatic doors. I stumbled forward, calling out to him, but he vanished into the rainy evening before I could get a second look. I stood there clutching my prescription, the pharmacy floor blurring into a smear of gray. I rushed home, my hands shaking so violently I dropped my keys twice on the porch. Inside, the house was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of Mark's keyboard in the study. I walked slowly toward the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked up at the attic hatch, tucked away in the shadows of the ceiling. I reached the study door and pushed it open just a crack. Mark was hunched over his monitors, his face lit by the cold, flickering glow of lines of code that looked far too complex to be anything related to accounting. He froze as the door creaked. He didn't turn around, but his voice, usually soft and gentle, sounded sharpened, cold, and utterly unfamiliar. "You're home early," he said. And then, without looking back, he reached into his desk drawer. I heard the distinct, unmistakable metallic click of a safety being disengaged. "And you look like you've seen a ghost. Did someone say something to you, darling? Or should I go ahead and explain why you're never going to leave this house again?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My lungs felt like they had been filled with liquid nitrogen, making every breath a jagged, painful effort. Mark sat there, his back still to me, his fingers hovering over a mechanical keyboard that hummed with a soft, pulsing red light. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of things left unsaid for years. "I asked you a question, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping into a register so devoid of warmth that it sounded like a machine mimicking a human. He finally rotated his chair, and for the first time in 10 years of marriage, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. His eyes, usually crinkled at the corners with a soft, analytical kindness, were now hard as flint, devoid of any empathy. He held an object in his hand, not a firearm, thankfully, but a small black device that looked like a localized jammer. He set it on the desk, and the hum of the house suddenly deepened, as if we had been cut off from the rest of the world. "The old man at the pharmacy," I managed to choke out, my voice sounding thin and alien in the soundproofed room. "He thanked you. He talked about illegal weapons, about an organized scheme. He mentioned a false bottom in the attic, Mark. What is going on?" Mark sighed, a long, weary sound that lacked any apology. He leaned back, crossing his arms. He didn't look like a computer programmer anymore. He looked like a soldier waiting for the inevitable arrival of the enemy. "I told myself you'd never find out. I built this life specifically to be a bunker, a place where the ghosts of my past couldn't reach. But the old man, I assume he was Elias, was always careless. He was never good at keeping his head down." "Elias?" I stepped into the room, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. "You know him? You really were part of that group?" "I was the one who liquidated it," Mark corrected, his tone clinical. "When the service's internal review realized that I had smuggled those packets of substances to the proper authorities to dismantle the network from within, they didn't treat me like a hero. They saw me as a loose end. They tried to hit me with a heavy accusation, to bury me under a mountain of falsified evidence so I'd spend decades in a hole, never to see daylight again. I had to disappear, Sarah. And to disappear, I needed a new identity. I needed a wife. I needed a facade of normalcy so perfect that even the most rigorous scanners wouldn't blink twice." The air in the room seemed to vibrate. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. "So I'm just a cover? A piece of software you installed to make your life look upgraded?" Mark stood up, his movements predatory and precise. He walked toward me, and I reflexively backed into the hallway, my heels catching on the carpet. "You are my anchor," he said, his voice softening, though his eyes remained frozen. "Without you, I am just a target." "But you've made a mistake, Sarah. You didn't just talk to a random stranger. You invited the attention of people who don't care about the truth. They only care about the ledger, and that ledger says, I owe them a debt." He grabbed my shoulders, not harshly but with a firm grip that reminded me of the old man's warning. "We have to go, now." "Go? Go where?" "I'm not going anywhere with you until I understand why there are weapons in my attic." I tried to shove him off, but he didn't budge. "Those weapons," he whispered, leaning so close I could feel the coldness of his skin, "aren't for protection anymore. They're for the insurance policy I buried in the floorboards. The service thinks I burned the evidence, but I kept the keys to their entire archive. That's why they've been watching us. And look." He pointed toward the front window. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw a black sedan creeping down the quiet suburban street, its headlights extinguished. It stopped directly in front of our house, and the doors opened in unison. 3 figures emerged, dressed in tactical gear, moving with a synchronized lethality that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through my heart. Mark pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Suddenly, every light in the house died, plunging us into total, suffocating darkness. "They aren't here for a conversation, Sarah," he breathed against my ear, his voice barely a tremor in the dark. And if you want to live to see tomorrow, you need to stop asking questions and start doing exactly what I tell you. Do you hear that?" I froze, straining my ears against the silence. From the front porch, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of a boot hitting the door, followed by the sickening splintering of wood. They were inside, and they weren't alone. I heard the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen. The back entrance had been breached, too. Mark pressed something cold and heavy into my hand, a flashlight or perhaps a weapon. I couldn't tell. "Hide," he hissed, shoving me toward the basement stairs. "Whatever you do, don't scream, and don't come out until you hear the sequence. If I don't come back in 10 minutes, go to the attic, pull the third plank from the left, and run. Don't look back. Don't look for me. Just run!" I turned to run, but just as I reached the door to the basement, a red laser sight swept across the hallway floor, stopping directly on my chest. I heard a voice boom from the living room, cold, authoritative, and terrifyingly calm. "We know you're in there, Mark. Come out, or we start with your anchor." The red dot danced over my chest, a burning crimson eye that seemed to mock the very idea of safety. I was frozen, my back pressed against the wood of the basement door while Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the laser. He looked at me. His expression was one of profound, terrifying calm. The look of a man who had been expecting this moment since the day he first said, "I do," at our wedding. "They're not going to kill you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice so low it was almost lost in the creaking of the house. "You are their leverage, but if they take you, they take the leverage away from me, and then I have no reason to be restrained." Before I could process his words, Mark did something that defied all logic. He didn't pull a weapon from his waistband. He reached up and pulled a small, innocuous-looking fire alarm casing off the hallway wall. He turned it, and behind the plastic housing, there was a keypad. He typed a rapid sequence, his fingers moving like a pianist playing a frantic concerto. "What are you—" I started, but the floor beneath us suddenly groaned. A muffled explosion rocked the foundation. It wasn't loud enough to shatter the windows, but it was enough to buckle the floorboards in the living room. Screams, sharp, professional, and cut short, echoed from the front of the house. The laser dot on my chest vanished as the intruders were thrown off balance by the sudden shift in the house's structural integrity. Mark grabbed my hand, his grip crushing, and yanked me toward the basement door. We didn't go down. He pulled me toward a hidden panel behind the coat rack, a wall section that pivoted on silent hydraulic hinges. We slipped inside, the darkness closing in around us like a shroud. "Stay here," he ordered, his breath hitching. "This is a panic room built for 3. There's a supply of water, a satellite uplink, and a direct line to the only person I trust who isn't currently trying to have me erased. If they get past the initial countermeasures in the hall, do not open this door for anyone, not even if they use my voice. They have voice modulation tech that is disturbingly accurate." "Mark, stop." I grabbed his sleeve, the fabric damp with sweat. "If you leave, they'll kill you. You said yourself they're a professional team. You're just one man." He turned back, his face illuminated by the small status light of a blinking server rack inside the hidden room. For a brief, heartbreaking second, the mask of the cold operative slipped. He reached out and touched my cheek, his thumb tracing my jawline with a tenderness that felt like a goodbye. "I wasn't the one who built the organized scheme, Sarah. I was the one who designed their security protocols. I know every weakness in their armor. The problem is, they know I know, which makes me the most dangerous variable in their equation." He stepped away, his hand sliding from mine. "Wait 10 minutes. If the signal on this monitor turns green, it means I've successfully routed them. If it turns red, you know what to do. The third plank in the attic. There's a passport, a key, and a set of instructions. Do not trust anyone who mentions the name Elias. He's the one who sold us out to pay his own debts." "Elias?" My voice broke. "The old man at the pharmacy? He warned me." Mark let out a bitter, jagged laugh. He didn't warn you, Sarah. He marked you. He needed to make sure you were scared enough to lead them right to the hiding spot. He's been working with the internal security check team for months. Everything he said was a setup to flush me out. My blood ran cold. The kind old man, the trembling hands, the peppermint scent. It had all been a performance. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Mark stepped out into the hallway and slid the panel shut. I was left in total stifling darkness, save for the flickering green light of the monitor. I listened, my heart hammering against my ribs as the sounds of the struggle escalated. There were shouts, the heavy thud of bodies hitting walls, and then the sound I feared most, the distinct mechanical sound of an automatic weapon being loaded. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the house, not Mark's, but a cold synthesized tone that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the panic room. "We have the perimeter, Mark. We know the girl is in the wall. You have 60 seconds to step out, or we burn the foundation. We have the canisters, and we aren't leaving without the data you stole." I stared at the monitor. The green light pulsed, steady and calm. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it shifted to amber. It was flickering, fighting to stay connected to the network. I leaned forward, my face inches from the screen, trying to read the text, scrolling across it. It wasn't a status update. It was a file directory being accessed remotely. And then the screen flickered one final time and displayed a live feed from the camera in our master bedroom. I stopped breathing. The feed showed Mark. He was on his knees, his hands bound behind his back, surrounded by 3 men in black. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking directly into the camera lens, his eyes wide and pleading, as if he knew I was watching. He leaned forward and whispered something. There was no audio, but I could read his lips perfectly. "They aren't here for the data, Sarah. They're here because you're pregnant." The monitor went black, followed immediately by the sound of a heavy, metallic thud against the wall of the panic room. My heart stopped. Someone was standing right on the other side of the hidden door, and they were trying to override the lock. The vibration of the heavy metallic thud sent a shiver through my spine, rattling the very bones of the panic room. I pressed my back against the cold, reinforced steel, my breath hitching in my throat. Pregnant? The word echoed in my mind, a ghost of a life I hadn't even realized was beginning to bloom, suddenly colored in the darkest hues of terror. I hadn't told Mark yet. I hadn't even told myself. How could they know? The override mechanism began to screech, a high-pitched, grinding sound of metal teeth chewing through complex electronic tumblers. My hands flew to my stomach, a primal, instinctual desire to protect the spark of life that had suddenly become the center of this nightmare. I scrambled toward the far corner of the room, my fingers brushing against the emergency cache Mark had mentioned. There, nestled beneath a thick layer of insulation, was a small black handgun, a weapon I had prayed I would never have to touch. "Sarah!" A voice boomed from the other side of the door. It was the synthesized voice again, but this time it was distorted, layered with a mocking, chilling cadence. "We know about the little one. We have the medical scans from your last appointment at the clinic. Do you really think a back alley physician is as good at keeping secrets as he is at taking bribes?" My blood turned to ice. My mind raced back to the routine blood work I'd had last Tuesday, the seemingly professional nurse who had been just a little too curious about my home life. Every interaction in the last 3 months hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a systematic harvest of information. "Open the door," the voice commanded, now calm and terrifyingly clinical. "Mark is currently being reassessed. If you comply, the child will be treated as an asset. If you resist, you are both merely collateral damage in a cleanup operation." I clutched the handgun. My palms were slick with sweat and my vision blurred, but a strange, icy clarity began to settle over my nerves. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I wasn't just an anchor. I was the only thing standing between these monsters and the future. Suddenly, the grinding at the lock stopped. A heavy, pregnant silence filled the air, so intense that I could hear the distant, frantic barking of a neighbor's dog outside. Then, a sharp hiss erupted from the ventilation grate near the ceiling. A faint, sweet-smelling mist began to curl into the room, swirling in the dim emergency light. Gas. I scrambled for a piece of cloth in the cache, wrapping it tightly around my nose and mouth. The air felt heavy, intoxicating, and the walls of the small room began to undulate. I fought the encroaching darkness, my eyes darting to the monitor. It was still black, dead to the world, but then a single line of text appeared, glowing a violent neon red. Heartbeat detected. Prepare for extraction. They weren't just here to kill us. They were here for the child. I looked at the door. The electronic lock began to glow a soft, ominous green, the color of a manual release from the outside. They had bypassed the security. The hydraulics of the panel began to slide, the heavy slab of the wall groaning as it yielded to the intruders. I didn't think. I didn't plan. As the panel opened to reveal the dark hallway and the silhouette of a man in tactical gear, I raised the weapon. My hand shook, but I squeezed the trigger. The roar of the gunshot in the enclosed space was deafening, a thunderclap that echoed in my skull. The figure in the doorway staggered backward, collapsing into the hallway. But there were more. I saw the flashlights, the tactical beams cutting through the haze, the heavy boots stepping over the body of the man I'd just shot. I backed away, hitting the far wall, nowhere left to run. Then a voice broke through the chaos, clear, sharp, and perfectly audible over the sound of the gas intake. It wasn't the synthesized voice of the intruders. It was Mark's voice, coming through the hidden intercom system I had missed earlier. "Sarah, listen to me carefully," he gasped, his voice raspy and pained. "Don't shoot the man in the lead. Check his chest plate. There's a manual override for the floor. Press the red light on the panel behind him. If you do it now, you'll drop them into the basement, but I'm down there too. We'll be buried together." I looked at the lead intruder. He was stepping into the room, his weapon raised, the laser sight already sweeping toward my belly. I had a split second to choose: surrender and watch my child become an asset, or pull the trigger on the panel and gamble on a burial that might be the only way to escape their reach. As the intruder reached for me, his gloved hand closing around my throat, I saw the red button on his tactical vest, a kill switch for the building's localized seismic anchors. My finger hovered over the trigger of my own weapon, pointed directly at the button on his chest. But just as I started to press, the floor beneath us suddenly disintegrated, and the entire room began to plummet into the abyss below. The world turned into a nauseating blur of spinning concrete, snapping cables, and the deafening roar of the floor collapsing into the sub-basement bunker Mark had built years ago. Gravity became my enemy, and for a terrifying, weightless moment, I was suspended in a void before hitting the reinforced steel floor of the lower level with a bone-jarring thud. The darkness was absolute save for the emergency strobes of the facility's failing power grid, which flickered like a dying heartbeat. I gasped, my lungs burning as the dust from the pulverized ceiling coated my throat. Above me, the debris was still settling, the muffled shouts of the men who had been standing on the platform now replaced by groans of pain and the metallic clatter of dropped equipment. I forced myself to move, my body screaming in protest, and crawled toward the dim, amber glow of the manual override panel Mark had described. "Mark!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Mark, answer me!" There was no response, only the sound of heavy breathing nearby. I scrambled toward the voice, my hands trembling as I felt for him in the dark. I found his shoulder, cold and slick with blood. He was slumped against a support pillar, his hands still tied, but he was alive. As I tore the tape from his wrists, he collapsed against me, his eyes wide and unfocused in the strobe light. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice a ghost of itself. You actually triggered the collapse?" "I didn't have a choice," I sobbed, fumbling with the restraints. You said we had to bury them. You said it was the only way." Mark pulled himself up, wincing as he looked toward the center of the pit. The ceiling had caved in, trapping the 3 intruders under a mountain of structural steel and concrete. They were incapacitated, perhaps worse, but the alarm system was blaring now, a shrill, persistent siren that signaled the service was on its way. The internal security check team would be here in minutes to finish what the raiding party had started. "We have to go," Mark said, his voice regaining that cold, clinical edge of command. "There's a drainage tunnel behind the north support pillar. It leads to the river. It's tight, it's cold, and it's our only chance." We didn't look back. We didn't look at the ruin of our home, or the secrets buried beneath the floorboards. We squeezed through the narrow, slick concrete passage, the smell of damp earth and stagnant water filling my nose. Behind us, the house began to groan and tilt as the integrity of the ground finally gave way to the sinkhole Mark had triggered. Above, I heard the heavy, synchronized thud of boots on the lawn. The cleanup crew had arrived to erase the scene. We reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into the biting cold of the riverbank, hidden by the dense, tangled reeds. Mark collapsed, his strength finally failing him. He pulled me close, his hands, the hands that had dismantled organizations and built a life from stolen pieces, now shaking uncontrollably. "They won't stop," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "They'll track us. They'll look for the trail." "Let them," I said, a fire I didn't know I possessed rising within me. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the small encrypted drive I had swiped from the panic room before the floor gave way, the insurance policy Mark had mentioned. If they want the data, they'll have to find us. And if they find us, I'll be ready. Mark looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine awe in his eyes. The anchor he had installed was no longer a piece of software. It was a person, a survivor. We spent the next 6 months living in the margins. We moved through ghost towns and quiet outskirts, leaving behind the digital breadcrumbs that Mark once knew so well, but now manipulated with the desperate expertise of a man running for his life. We became shadows, shifting identities like clothing. The Internal Service tried. They sent their agents to the clinics, to the banks, to the places where they thought we would be vulnerable. But they were looking for a software architect and his naive wife. They weren't looking for 2 people who had nothing left to lose. I remember the day it finally ended. We were sitting in a quiet, sun-drenched cafe in a coastal town 3,000 miles from the house we had once called a home. I watched as a man, one of the agents we had seen in our living room that night, walked into the square, his eyes scanning the crowd with lethal intent. I didn't panic. I didn't reach for a weapon. I simply picked up my phone, typed a single sequence of code into the public server we had spent months infiltrating, and pressed send. Within seconds, the agent's phone began to vibrate, then his watch, then his tablet. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the screen as the entire history of his unit's illegal activities, the suppressed investigations, the falsified records, the organized schemes they had tried to pin on Mark, were uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement server in the country. It was total exposure. The service was burning, and their only option was to retreat and save their own necks. The agent looked toward our table, his gaze locking with mine for a fleeting second. He saw the cold, hard resolve in my face, and he saw the small, protective hand I kept resting on my belly. He knew, with sudden, terrifying clarity, that if he moved toward us, he wouldn't be walking away. He turned on his heel and disappeared into the crowd, never to look back. I looked at Mark, who was watching the horizon with a peace I had never seen before. We were exhausted, we were scarred, and we were effectively invisible. But as the sun began to dip below the ocean, casting long, golden shadows over the town, I knew we had won. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice soft. Mark took my hand, his grip steady and warm. "For them, yes. For us, it's just the beginning." We didn't go home. We didn't need to. We walked toward the shoreline, two people with 1,000 ghosts behind us, ready to start a life that was finally, truly our own. The pharmacy, the old man, the pharmacy lights, and the metallic smell of danger. They were all just fading memories of a life that had tried to bury us. But we had found a way to grow in the dark, and now we were ready for the light.